This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you, who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the box was cardboard, the detective was dying, and the bridge was Thor, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
Have you ever stopped to wonder why James Fillmore disappeared looking for his umbrella? Or just how parsley can manage to sink into the butter?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 381, The Second Collaboration. Well, hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you ready to collaborate?
I'm always ready to collaborate. Having a community, having a great partner like you is what makes all this fun.
Well, I'm just trying to add up all of the episodes we've done in my head. We've got 381 now episodes here on Trifles. We've got more than 285 episodes over on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. That's a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, it is. How about that?
Yeah. And we keep doing it despite our best instincts.
Huh. Yes, well, we do keep going. Let's see. 381. 381. Wonder what that means.
You're thinking of 566? Is that...
No, 3 words, 8 letters, and 381 is shorthand, typically used in texts or instant messaging, according to Quora.
666.
For I love you. So I guess this episode number 381 episodes mean we must love Sherlock Holmes.
That, and I did the math wrong, unfortunately. It's a good thing I did because I would have freaked myself out. 381 plus 285 is 666.
Uh-oh.
This is the mark of the beast, my friend.
Uh-oh.
The end of our collaboration. We better hurry up and get to episode 382.
No, it's not the end of our collaboration. Unfortunately, it's the end of civilization as we've known it.
Well, either way.
At least it's not anything important.
I'm not going to miss anything. Yeah, exactly. Well, this is not about our collaboration. This is about the second collaboration that the author John Ball Jr. wrote about in 1954. This episode is the third of the month here in Season 8, and that means we take you back to a piece of Sherlockian scholarship. And in this case, this is John Ball's work that first appeared in the Baker Street Journal in 1954 and then was republished in the Baker Street Reader, Cornerstone Writings about Sherlock Holmes by Philip A. Schreffler. Phil is a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, former editor of the Baker Street Journal, and he put the Baker Street Reader together in 1984. So it was a way to introduce people in the 1980s to this older Sherlockian scholarship, just as we're doing here in the 2020s with this podcast. If you'd like to support us, you can do that whichever way makes sense for you. We do have a Patreon, patreon.com/trifles, and Substack, trifles.substack.com. You can choose whatever way works for you, as I said, but we do have a wonderful community that is growing around Trifles, and there is now the chat function that is available on the web as well as on the phone. I'm very pleased about that because it allows us to do a little more easy interacting than we used to, just having to thumb our way and squint our way through our phone screens. So check that out if you are so inclined. Okay, well, we are going to delve into the lovely pages of the Baker Street Reader here. What do we have in store for us with this second collaboration, Bert?
Well, we're going to be talking about a topic that has never, I don't believe, until John Ball's 1954 essay, been properly addressed, which is, we know, of course, that Conan Doyle was the literary agent and Watson was the author of the Sherlock Holmes cases, of recording the records and details of his friend Sherlock Holmes. But if that's the case, what was the connection? How was that connection made between these two medical men, John H. Watson, late of the Indian Army, and Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle, the literary agent? Well, that's what John Ball gets into here, but the little side window on this is John Ball, whom we discovered in looking at this particular essay, and that's just a fascinating story because he was a writer, and among other things, he wrote In the Heat of the Night, published by Harper and Row in 1965, and all about the African-American police detective Virgil Tibbs.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
He won the Edgar for the best first novel from the Mystery Writers of America. Sidney Poitier, whom you've just heard, was the star of that Oscar-winning film. And he was Ball was just an interesting character. He was born in New York. For a time, he worked as a part-time reserve deputy for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. He was trained in martial arts. He was a nudist. And he was a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, invested in 1960 as the Oxford Flyer.
Did the Baker Street Irregulars have a nudist branch?
Oh, sure. You've never gone to one of those meetings?
I must say I miss those.
It's
Fortunately
the
or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it.
It's the adventure of the all-over tan.
Oh.
The volleyball games are a lot of fun. Yeah, I always love to go there. When John Ball was in college, he performed as a semi-professional magician under the name Jacques Morintel, and also the nom de plume How Does He? Howduzi. What an interesting fellow who gave us this bit of Sherlockian scholarship.
You know, I would be remiss if I didn't point out Samuel Rosenberg's classic, Naked is the Best Disguise. Maybe John Ball contributed to that as well.
Yeah. Well, that's, naked is the best disguise because as some of the lookers on encounter the nude divisions of the Baker Street Irregulars, there's an almost irresistible tendency to turn your sight away, and therefore pay no attention to the disguise. So
yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
So anyway, in the second collaboration here, John Ball says, of the many mysteries of the canon, perhaps the most perplexing one is this topic, the role played by the literary agent in making Watson's priceless manuscripts available to a profoundly grateful posterity. And clearly an examination of the whole matter is in order. Well, he says, Ball gets right to it. He says the essential clue which unlocks this whole puzzle is found in the first three words to appear within the revered pages of A Study in Scarlet, being a reprint from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D., late of the Army Medical Department.
Now, see, that's interesting because, at any time you crack open a Sherlock Holmes story, and certainly when you're cracking open the very first, I think there's a tendency to just get right into it. Let's see where the action takes us. Let's see who we're introduced to, etc. And yet, this trifling word, reprint. Well, where was it printed in the first place? It really is a conundrum.
Yeah. Well, There have been no traces for future researchers to uncover, so the possibility presents itself that no such edition did in fact exist. And so, if you reason backwards from that, the truth may be revealed. So rather than retrace that reasoning process, perhaps we should be setting down the facts in their proper order.
Yeah.
So
I like it. Logic. Let's make sense of this.
Yeah, so returning from his period of military service, Dr. Watson gravitates to London, finds that time lays heavy on his hands, his pension is inadequate, he doesn't have any real friends. He could not and did not fail to give some thought about the matter of setting up a practice. And about the same time, another physician, in closely parallel circumstances, found that he too had these kinds of needs. And so they were both two young doctors, Watson and Doyle. They must have met, may have been at a medical lecture, in the physicians section of the public library, at a medical supply house where they'd gone separately to figure out the cost of the equipment needed to outfit an office. Well, wherever it was, they met, and a friendship and a collaboration was formed which was to enrich the world. Because as great as the association between Watson and Holmes was, of equal importance nearly was this collaboration between Watson and Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle.
Well, that's interesting. I think it's not at all unlikely the way Ball has stated it here, but if one is to believe that it was of equal importance, then why wouldn't Watson have recorded their first meeting, just as he did with the first meeting with Sherlock Holmes at the Bart's laboratory?
Well, because he didn't know that it was going to be important. He didn't really understand the reception that his writings about his strange friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, would have.
I suppose. And at that point, I suppose he would have been too wrapped up in the success of the Holmes stories to go back and retrospectively write up his first meeting with Dr. Doyle.
Well, also in those days, Dr. Doyle and Doctors Doyle and Watson were not particularly noteworthy sorts of people. It would not have occurred to Watson to write about his friendship with another doctor, because, of course, the interesting thing was this character, this very unusual character of Sherlock Holmes that involved murder. That's much more interesting than just, a fellow medico. In bold move, met another doctor.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So, and in fact, they might have decided to set up a practice together had not young Stamford come on the scene and the Baker Street saga begun.
Thank goodness.
So, that's a story that's worth telling. It
is. So. Watson, of course, then quickly thereafter saw Holmes at work, witnessed this fascinating individual and his application of his scientific methods, his interactions with Scotland Yard, etc. Champion of law and order. And here, we have, of course, Watson's stalwart spirit coming forth and wanting to chronicle something like this. And so he would have naturally talked about this with his friend, Dr. Doyle. And Ball notes that, they agreed that Sherlock Holmes should be introduced to the world.
Yeah, but Ball points out that the one of the things that motivated this was Watson wanted to correct a serious wrong. Because at this point, the case of that we know as a study in Scarlet had finished. Watson had witnessed a great achievement by a magnificent champion of law and order, and the credit for that man's work had been rested where it did not belong. And this is what he talked over with Doyle, and the two men agreed that Holmes should be given to the world. And Watson had no idea that this other physician would become eventually the author of The White Company and other works that would carry his name around the world. But, he clearly recognized the talents of this other doctor. And they talked together of the great detective, and they're the ones who plan to publish an account of his latest exploit under the title of A Study in Scarlet. See, and in fact, that's in A Study in Scarlet because Watson remarks to Holmes shortly after the arrest of Jefferson Hope, "Oh, never mind. I have all the facts in my journal, and the public shall know of them."
And we are lucky for knowing them. And this says it doesn't admit any interpretation other than a statement at the time of the events that Watson would prepare an attempt to publish a full and truthful account of the whole affair. So what did he do? He picked up his pen and he wrote. From the beginning, getting summoned to Lauriston Gardens and his mixed reception of Holmes, and of course Gregson and Lestrade's mixed reception of Holmes. The writing in the wall that was done in blood, the pills, right? The choice of placebo or poison, and the capture and then relative quick death of Hope thereafter. And Watson even reported his intention to give the truth to the public. And then he took his manuscript to his friend, Dr. Doyle, for comment and approval.
Well, and this gets us to the resolution of a great question that's plagued people for years about A Study in Scarlet. And that question is, what's all this stuff here about the American section? Well, they must have talked over the manuscript. And Doyle recognized the wonderful details, the magnificent sketches, but Doyle also saw something else. As it stood, the manuscript, according to Doyle, was pointed and concise, but it was almost too short. In fact, and Doyle was aware, the payment for literary work was often influenced by the length of the manuscript. You'll get more money for a longer manuscript. This story, the story of the Mormons in the New World, should be told. Well, Watson had already done his best, and this was only his first work. So he proposed that Doyle provide the needed middle section. And Doyle agreed, and so it's from his pen that the stirring adventures in Utah flowed onto the paper.
Interesting solution to that age-old conundrum, who wrote the American chapters of A Study in Scarlet. So the joint manuscript was then ready, but now the difficulty arose crediting the authorship. Now, there were several possibilities. A joint pseudonym, the name of either collaborator, both names, or just anonymity. Well, of course, they could eliminate the last one. The name of the author would be demanded, certainly from the public. A pseudonym was equally as difficult, since Watson, while he was able to relocate his battle wound for the sake of personal modesty, could hardly conceal his actual identity. And at this impasse, without question, each proposed that the other accept full credit. Well, that's difficult then, because both men were honorable, champions of honor, and each flatly refused to affix his name to one word for which he truly could not honorably claim credit. So, at this stalemate, a solution was found. A joint byline was agreed upon as the only ethical and practical solution. So how to work both names into the heading when editors might be expected to demand just one? That was not a major problem. Watson's insistence, Doyle's name appeared as author, since that portion of the manuscript which was his gave no clue as to its writer. Beyond any legitimate doubt, the famed middle section of The Study in Scarlet was written by Arthur Conan Doyle. No responsible library in the world can dispute that statement. Ha! So, in order to credit Watson properly for his own participation, even though it was self-identifying and self-evident, Doyle himself wrote a brief statement which opens the canon. The preface, which begins, being a reprint, and which, without equivocation, names Watson as the author of that portion of the account which he relates in the first person. Well, there we go.
And, we can expect that Watson objected to this reference of a supposed previous publication, but it was well within the accepted literary license, and, by the way, he couldn't think of anything better. So Watson probably acquiesced. And that's the point, too, that we mentioned earlier. Nobody realized at the time the tremendous impact which the name of Sherlock Holmes was to have on the world. So, when the Sign of the Four endowed Watson with both a brilliant new example of Holmes's genius and the hand of a lovely bride, he picks up his pen once more, but the fatal pattern had already been established. The name of Doyle had to be upon this account also in order to be acceptable to the publisher, and it's even likely that he put it there himself. And, it's kind of like Frankenstein, because when that book first introduced this famous monster to the general public, kind of confusion resulted, and the public insisted upon calling the monster by his character, by his creator's rather distinctive name, Frankenstein. And so there you are.
And here we have Ball, set in the 1950s writing about this. Frankenstein very much in the popular culture at that point. And he writes similarly, when a famous fictional detective pursued a thin man in his first widely publicized case, his own subsequent exploits came to refer to him as the Thin Man, a confusion which exists to this day.
That's right. Poor Nick Charles was not the Thin Man. It was the missing man whose mysterious disappearance motivated that book, who was the Thin Man.
That's right. Although I wouldn't object to being known as the Thin Man.
No, I'd love to be called the Thin Man. That's wonderful. Well, so now we understand why, during his long and brilliant life, Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle displayed a remarkable reluctance. Whenever the subject of Sherlock Holmes came up, he deprecated the credit which was given him for the manuscript that bore his name and insisted that he be viewed instead as the author of many other celebrated works, which revealed his talents at their brilliant best. So Sir Arthur was an incomparable gentleman, yet both he and Watson were constrained to accept the situation that had been thrust upon them.
Oh, well, so let's remember in gratitude that if it hadn't been for the literary knowledge and the skill of Arthur Conan Doyle, even we might not today know the name of Sherlock Holmes.
And that is far from a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
It's with a heavy heart that I take up my pen to write these, the last words in which I shall ever record the singular gifts by which my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, was distinguished. shall ever regard him as the best and the wisest man I have ever known.